Subscribe now and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional story that touches your heart. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Thomas Warren began his regular patrol through the East Wing. He had served as a royal guard for 12 years, and his dedication to duty was known throughout the entire palace staff. Thomas took pride in his work, ensuring every corner of the royal residence remained secure and every protocol was followed without question. That particular Tuesday morning seemed no different from any other. The palace was quiet, with most of the staff attending to their morning duties in other sections of the building. Thomas walked the familiar corridors with measured steps, his eyes scanning every door and window as he had done thousands of times before. The weight of his uniform felt comfortable against his shoulders, a constant reminder of the responsibility he carried. As he approached the private study near the Queen's chambers, Thomas noticed something unusual. The door stood slightly ajar, which immediately caught his attention. This particular room was rarely used, and protocol dictated it should always remain locked when unoccupied. Thomas felt his heartbeat quicken as years of training kicked in. He moved closer, carefully placing his hand on his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. Through the narrow opening, Thomas could see movement inside the study. Someone was there, hunched over the large mahogany desk that dominated the room. The figure appeared to be going through papers, moving with urgent, nervous gestures. Thomas recognized the blonde hair immediately. It was Camilla, the queen consort, but something about her behavior struck him as deeply wrong. Thomas stayed, perfectly still, observing from his position in the hallway. Camilla seemed unaware of his presence, completely focused on the document spread before her. She held what appeared to be an official document with the royal seal visible even from where Thomas stood. Her hands trembled slightly as she made notes on a separate piece of paper, occasionally glancing toward the door with obvious anxiety. The guard's mind raced with questions. Why would Camilla be in this study alone? Why did she look so nervous? Most importantly, what was she doing with those official documents? Thomas had been trained to recognize important palace papers. In the document Camilla held bore all the marks of an official royal will. The distinctive paper, the seal, the formal formatting were all unmistakable to his trained eye. Thomas watched as Camilla pulled out a small case from her handbag. Inside were pens and what looked like correction fluid. His stomach tightened as he realized what he might be witnessing. Camilla carefully opened the document, studying it closely under the desk lamp. She then began to make small marks on the paper, her movements deliberate and calculated. The weight of what Thomas was seeing began to sink in. If Camilla was indeed altering an official document, especially something as important as the Queen's will, this would be an enormous scandal. But Thomas also knew he needed to be absolutely certain before taking any action. Accusing a member of the royal family of such a serious crime without solid proof would end his career and possibly land him in legal trouble. He quietly activated the small camera built into his uniform badge, a security feature all guards carried for documentation purposes. The device began recording silently, capturing everything happening in the study. Thomas knew this footage would be crucial evidence if his suspicions proved correct. His hands remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Camilla continued her work, completely absorbed in the task. She would read a section, make a note, then carefully apply correction fluid to specific words in the document. Thomas could see her replacing the covered text with new writing, her hand moving with surprising steadiness given her earlier nervousness. The process took several minutes, during which Thomas barely breathed, afraid any sound might alert her to his presence. As Camilla worked, Thomas noticed other documents on the desk. Some appeared to be drafts or copies, covered with handwritten notes and crossed-out sections. It looked like she had been planning this for some time, preparing exactly what changes to make. The organized nature of her actions suggested this was not an impulsive decision but a carefully plotted scheme. The morning light grew stronger, streaming through the study windows and illuminating the scene with harsh clarity. Thomas knew he faced an impossible decision. His duty to protect the royal family conflicted directly with what he was witnessing. If he interrupted now, would Camilla destroy the evidence? If he waited too long, would she complete her alterations and escape undetected? Every second felt like an eternity as he weighed his options. Camilla suddenly froze, her head tilting slightly as if she heard something. Thomas held his breath, pressing himself against the wall. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain she would hear it. The moment stretched unbearably as Camilla's eyes moved toward the door, her expression shifting from concentration to fear. Thomas realized his time for observation was running out. Thomas remained frozen against the wall, his breathing shallow and controlled. Camilla stood from the desk, clutching the document against her chest as she moved toward the window. For a terrifying moment, Thomas thought she might be planning to destroy the evidence, perhaps by tearing it up or even burning it. But instead, she simply stood there, staring out at the palace gardens with a troubled expression. The guard used this moment to adjust his position slightly, ensuring his camera had a clear view of both Camilla and the desk where the other documents lay scattered. He could see now that there were at least 5 or 6 different papers, all appearing to be official palace documents. Some had sticky notes attached with reminders written in Camilla's distinctive handwriting. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, Camilla returned to the desk. She laid the document down carefully and pulled out a magnifying glass from the drawer. Thomas watched in disbelief as she examined her own alterations, checking them against what appeared to be samples of the Queen's signature and handwriting. The level of preparation was staggering and deeply disturbing. Camilla worked with intense focus, occasionally using a special pen to touch up letters or adjust the spacing between words. She had clearly studied the original document extensively, learning every detail of how it was written. Thomas recognized the professional quality of her forgery attempts. This was not amateur work but a carefully studied and executed plan. As she worked, Camilla spoke quietly to herself, though Thomas could not make out the exact words. Her voice carried a mixture of nervousness and determination. At one point, she pulled out her phone and looked at what appeared to be reference photos. Zooming in on specific sections before comparing them to the document in front of her, Thomas knew he could not remain hidden much longer. Other guards would soon begin their rounds in this section of the palace. He needed to decide on a course of action before someone else stumbled upon this situation. But confronting Camilla alone seemed dangerous, not physically but legally and politically. He needed witnesses, preferably senior palace officials who could properly document what was happening. He carefully reached for his radio, keeping his movements slow and silent. Thomas needed to contact his supervisor, but he also needed to ensure Camilla did not hear the transmission. He switched the radio to silent mode, sending a text message instead through the secure palace communication system. The message was brief but clear, requesting immediate but discreet assistance at his location. While waiting for backup, Thomas continued recording. Camilla had now moved to what appeared to be the final stages of her alterations. She was using a small heating device, possibly to age the ink or make her changes blend more seamlessly with the original document. The sophistication of her methods suggested she had received advice or training from someone knowledgeable. It's about document forgery. 3 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Thomas could see movement down the hallway as his supervisor, Captain Richard Morrison, approached with 2 other senior guards. They moved with professional silence, their expressions serious as they took in the situation. Captain Morrison positioned himself next to Thomas, observing the scene through the door, while the other guards moved to cover alternate exits from the study. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened as he watched Camilla work. He pulled out his own recording device, ensuring multiple cameras were documenting everything. The captain's presence gave Thomas confidence that he had made the right decision. Whatever happened next would be handled properly, with witnesses and evidence that could not be disputed or swept under the carpet. Camilla suddenly gathered all the documents together, organizing them into a neat stack. She pulled out a folder from her bag and began placing the papers inside, carefully ensuring they were in a specific order. Thomas noticed her hands were shaking more noticeably now, suggesting she was nearing the end of her task and feeling the pressure of completing it. Without detection, the Queen Consort then did something unexpected. She pulled out a small spray bottle and lightly misted the documents, probably to remove any traces of her perfume or scent that might have transferred during handling. The attention to detail was remarkable and chilling. Camilla had thought through every aspect of her deception, planning for contingencies that most people would never consider. As she prepared to leave the study, Captain Morrison made the decision to act. He stepped forward, pushing the door fully open with a firm motion. The sound made Camilla spin around, her face draining of color as she saw not just one guard, but 4 senior members of the palace security team standing in the doorway. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the expensive carpet. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Her eyes darted between the guards and the scattered documents, clearly calculating whether she could explain away what they had witnessed. But the expressions on the guards' faces told her that explanations would be futile. Captain Morrison stepped into the room, his voice steady and professional, despite the historic nature of the moment. He informed Camilla that her actions had been observed and recorded, and that she needed to remain in the study while senior palace officials were contacted. The weight of protocol and duty filled every word, making clear that this situation had moved beyond personal discretion into the realm of official palace business. Camilla's face transformed from shock to anger in seconds. She drew herself up to her full height, attempting to reclaim the authority her position afforded her. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a sharp edge of indignation. She demanded to know what the guards thought they were doing, interrupting her private business. She reminded them of her position as queen consort and suggested they would face serious consequences for this intrusion. Captain Morrison remained unmoved by her protests. His years of service had taught him to maintain composure even in the most unprecedented situations. He calmly explained that palace security protocols applied to everyone within these walls, regardless of rank or title. The documents scattered on the floor were clearly visible, their official seals and markings impossible to deny. Any explanation Camilla might offer would need to account for why she was alone in a secured study with what appeared to be the Queen's. Will Thomas watched as other guards carefully collected the fallen papers, handling each one with gloved hands to preserve any evidence. Among the documents was indeed the Queen's official will, along with several pages that appeared to be practice copies where Camilla had rehearsed her forgery technique. There were also notes in her handwriting detailing specific changes she intended to make, including alterations to inheritance arrangements and the distribution of certain royal properties. The Queen consort's demeanor shifted again as she realized the severity of her situation. Her anger gave way to something more calculating. She asked to speak with her private secretary immediately, asserting her right to legal representation. Captain Morrison agreed but made clear that she would remain in the study, under guard supervision until senior palace officials arrived to take control of the situation. Within 20 minutes, the private study had become the center of intense activity. The Lord Chamberlain arrived first, his face grave as he surveyed the scene. Behind him came the keeper of the privy purse, the Queen's private secretary, and several other high-ranking palace officials. Each person who entered the room seemed to age several years as they took in what had happened. The Lord Chamberlain requested a private word with Camilla, but Captain Morrison insisted that guards remain present as witnesses to any conversation. The compromise was reached that 2 guards would stay in the room but position themselves at a distance that allowed for relatively private discussion while ensuring no evidence could be tampered with or destroyed. Thomas was chosen as one of the 2 guards to remain, perhaps because he was the first to discover the situation. He stood near the window, maintaining professional detachment while his mind reeled from the implications of what was unfolding. The Lord Chamberlain spoke in low, urgent tones with Camilla, who responded with equal intensity. Though Thomas could not hear specific words, the body language told a clear story of accusations and denials. Meanwhile, forensic experts from the Palace Security Division arrived with specialized equipment to document everything in the study. They photographed the desk from multiple angles, collected samples of ink and paper, and carefully bagged all the documents as evidence. One expert examined the Queen's will under a special light that revealed the correction fluid in fresh ink clearly, making the alterations impossible to dispute. As the investigation unfolded within the study, word of the incident had begun spreading through the palace. Staff members whispered in corridors, and senior officials held emergency meetings behind closed doors. The implications were staggering. If Camilla had successfully altered the Queen's will, it would have affected the royal succession, the distribution of private estates, and potentially the future of the monarchy itself. Thomas learned from whispered conversations between officials that the Queen herself had been informed and was reportedly devastated by the betrayal. She had apparently been feeling unwell recently and had updated her will just 2 weeks earlier with her solicitors present. The document Camilla had been altering was the official copy kept in the palace archives, which would have been referenced. When the time came to execute the will's provisions, the motive behind Camilla's actions remained unclear to most people in the room, but the notes she had made provided some clues. Several changes appeared designed to increase her personal inheritance and give her greater control over certain royal properties after the Queen's death. Other alterations seemed intended to reduce the inheritance of other family members, though the specifics were being kept confidential by the officials examining the documents. As afternoon approached, the decision was made to move Camilla to a more secure location within the palace, where she could be questioned more thoroughly. The Lord Chamberlain made arrangements for her immediate family to be notified, though what exactly they would be told remained a matter of intense discussion among the palace officials. Thomas finally received permission to step outside the study for a brief break. In the hallway, he found Captain Morrison looking exhausted despite his maintained professional demeanor. The captain quietly thanked Thomas for his alertness and proper handling of the situation. He emphasized that Thomas's decision to document everything before intervening had been crucial in ensuring the evidence would be irrefutable. As Thomas prepared to resume his duties, he overheard 2 senior officials discussing the broader implications. The scandal, if it became public, would rock the monarchy to its core. Even if it was kept secret, the damage to relationships within the royal family would be severe and lasting. Trust, once broken at this level, could never be fully restored. The evening brought no resolution, only more questions and deeper investigations. Legal experts arrived to advise on the criminal implications of document forgery and tampering with royal wills. Constitutional scholars were consulted about the unprecedented nature of a queen consort attempting such an act. Every aspect of the situation was being examined from multiple angles, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The following morning brought a somber atmosphere to the palace. Thomas reported for duty to find the entire security team had been briefed on maintaining absolute discretion about the incident. Every guard, every staff member who knew anything about what had happened, was required to sign additional confidentiality agreements. The message was clear: this situation would be handled internally, and any leaks would result in immediate dismissal and possible legal action. Thomas spent the morning reviewing his recorded footage with senior officials and legal advisors. They examined every frame, noting timestamps and creating a detailed timeline of Camilla's actions. The video clearly showed her using correction fluid, writing over sections of the will, and consulting reference materials to match the original handwriting style. There was no ambiguity about what she had been attempting. During a brief break, Thomas encountered one of the Queen's personal assistants in the hallway. The woman looked as though she had been crying, her eyes red and puffy. She stopped when she saw Thomas, seeming to want to say something but unable to find the words. Finally, she simply thanked him for his service and walked away quickly. The encounter left Thomas feeling the emotional weight of the situation even more heavily. Meanwhile, Camilla had been moved to a private apartment within the palace grounds, effectively under house arrest while the investigation continued. Her legal team had arrived and was in constant consultation with palace officials about how to proceed. The question of whether this would become a criminal matter or be handled internally as a family issue remained unresolved. The palace staff worked hard to maintain normalcy for the public eye. Scheduled events continued as planned, though several private engagements were quietly canceled. The official explanation given was minor scheduling conflicts, nothing that would raise suspicion. But inside the palace walls, everyone moved with a tension that was almost physical. Waiting to see what would happen next, Thomas was called to give a formal statement to a panel that included the Lord Chamberlain, the keeper of the privy purse, and 3 senior legal advisors. He recounted everything he had witnessed, from first noticing the open door to the moment Captain Morrison intervened. The panel asked detailed questions about timing, about what he could see and hear, about his certainty regarding the documents involved. One advisor challenged Thomas on why he had waited to intervene, suggesting that he should have stopped Camilla immediately upon seeing her with the documents. Thomas explained his reasoning calmly, noting that confronting a member of the royal family alone without evidence or witnesses would have been reckless and could have led to the destruction of evidence. His decision to document first and then call for backup had ensured the situation was handled properly with irrefutable proof. The panel seemed satisfied with his explanation, and Thomas was dismissed with instructions to remain available for further questioning if needed. As he left the meeting room, he passed by the apartment where Camilla was being held. 2 guards stood at the door, their faces expressionless, but their presence speaking volumes about the seriousness of the situation. That afternoon, the Queen herself requested to speak with Thomas. The summons came unexpectedly, and Thomas felt his hands tremble slightly as he was escorted to her private sitting room. He had seen the Queen many times during his service, but had never been in her private presence for an actual conversation. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders. The Queen looked older than Thomas remembered, her face lined with exhaustion and what appeared to be deep sadness. She gestured for him to sit, an unusual informality that somehow made the moment even more intimidating. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but steady, carrying the authority of decades of rule tempered with genuine emotion. She thanked Thomas for his vigilance and his integrity in handling such a delicate situation. She acknowledged that discovering such betrayal from someone so close must have been shocking, and she appreciated that he had acted according to protocol rather than allowing the situation to escalate. The Queen's words were measured. Thomas could see the pain behind her composed exterior. The Queen then asked Thomas a question that surprised him. She wanted to know his honest opinion about what should happen next. Should this matter be handled quietly within the family? Or should proper legal channels be pursued regardless of the scandal it might cause? She emphasized that she was asking for his perspective as someone who had witnessed the crime firsthand, not as a guard following orders. Thomas took a moment to consider his response carefully. He acknowledged that he was not qualified to make such decisions about royal family matters, but he offered his thoughts honestly. He believed that justice should be applied equally, regardless of position or title. If any other person had attempted such forgery, they would face criminal prosecution. However, he also understood the unique circumstances and the potential damage to the monarchy that public exposure might cause. The Queen listened intently, nodding occasionally as Thomas spoke. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens beyond. Finally, she thanked him again and dismissed him, saying she had much to consider. Thomas left the room feeling emotionally drained, aware that he had just participated in a conversation that might influence the future of the royal family. Evening brought new developments. Rumors began circulating among the palace staff that Camilla had confessed to the alterations, but claimed she had been acting under extreme emotional stress. Her legal team was apparently arguing for leniency based on temporary impaired judgment. However, the careful planning evident in her notes and the sophistication of her methods suggested this was not an impulsive act born of momentary confusion. The third day after the incident brought a shift in atmosphere throughout the palace. Senior officials moved with greater purpose, suggesting decisions were being made at the highest levels. Thomas continued his regular duties, but his mind constantly returned to the Queen's question about justice and the right course of action. The weight of knowing such a significant secret felt heavier with each passing hour. Captain Morrison informed Thomas privately that a full security review was being conducted to understand how Camilla had gained access to the secured study and the documents within. Initial findings suggested she had obtained a key from someone on the household staff, though whether through deception or coercion remained unclear. The investigation was expanding to include background checks on anyone who might have assisted her, knowingly or unknowingly. Meanwhile, other members of the royal family had been informed of the situation. The palace buzzed with quiet tension as various family members arrived for private meetings with the Queen. Thomas observed several heated discussions taking place. Behind closed doors, voices occasionally rising despite attempts at discretion. The family was clearly divided on how to handle the crisis, with some advocating for complete secrecy and others pushing for accountability. Thomas learned from conversations between senior guards that forensic analysis of the documents had revealed even more concerning details. Camilla's alterations were not limited to the will itself. She had also attempted to modify accompanying documents that specified the management of royal estates and the allocation of certain personal belongings that held both monetary and sentimental value. The scope of her planned deception was far broader than initially realized. One particularly disturbing discovery was that this had not been Camilla's first attempt. Evidence suggested she had accessed the study at least twice before, possibly practicing or planning her approach. Security footage from previous weeks was being reviewed, and investigators found timestamps that showed brief entries into the study that had been dismissed as routine movements through the palace. Camilla had been patient and methodical, waiting for the right moment when she would have enough uninterrupted time. As the investigation deepened, questions emerged about Camilla's motivations beyond simple financial gain. Interviews with palace staff revealed that she had expressed frustration privately about her role and influence within the family. Some staff members recalled comments she made suggesting she felt her contributions were undervalued and her future security uncertain. These insights painted a picture of someone who felt vulnerable despite her elevated position. The Queen called another meeting with her most trusted advisors to discuss the path forward. Thomas was not present for these discussions, but their outcome would affect everyone in the palace. The options ranged from criminal prosecution to internal discipline to quiet separation from royal duties. Each choice carried its own set of consequences, both for the monarchy as an institution and for the individuals involved. That evening, Thomas was approached by a senior member of Camilla's legal team who requested an informal conversation. The lawyer was professional, but clearly searching for any weakness in the evidence or testimony that might help his client. He asked Thomas to reconsider his interpretation of what he had witnessed, suggesting that perhaps Camilla was simply reviewing documents rather than altering them. Thomas remained firm in his account, stating only what he had directly observed without embellishment or speculation. The lawyer's questions revealed the strategy Camilla's defense team was considering. They would likely argue that she had permission to review the documents, that the correction fluid and pens were for note-taking rather than forgery, and that any alterations were preliminary drafts rather than attempts to modify the official will. It was a weak defense given the video evidence, but it represented their best option for reducing the severity of consequences. The fourth day brought unexpected news. The Queen had made her decision, and palace officials were preparing to implement it. Thomas and the other guards directly involved in discovering the incident were summoned to a briefing where they learned the outcome. The Queen had chosen a middle path that balanced justice with protection of the monarchy's reputation. Camilla would not face criminal prosecution, but she would be stripped of most of her official duties and titles related to the Queen consort position. She would remain married to Prince Charles, but would be essentially removed from public royal life. A carefully worded statement would be released explaining that she was stepping back for personal health reasons, a cover story that protected the institution while removing her from power. Additionally, the Queen had ordered a complete revision of her will with multiple witnesses and copies distributed to separate legal firms. New security protocols were being implemented to prevent anyone from accessing such sensitive documents without multiple levels of authorization. The study where the incident occurred would be permanently sealed. Its contents moved to more secure locations. Thomas felt conflicted about the resolution. On one hand, he understood the practical necessity of protecting the monarchy from a scandal that could damage its standing irreparably. On the other hand, he could not shake the feeling that justice had been compromised for the sake of convenience and reputation. If Camilla had been anyone else, she would be facing years in prison for attempted forgery and fraud. Captain Morrison seemed to sense Thomas's internal struggle during a quiet moment between duties. The older man spoke carefully, acknowledging that life in service to the crown often required accepting decisions that felt imperfect. He reminded Thomas that their role was to protect and serve, not to judge or determine policy. The wisdom in his words offered some comfort, though the questions remained. The weeks following the Queen's decision brought gradual changes to palace life that most outsiders would never notice. Camilla made fewer public appearances, and when she did attend events, her role was diminished and carefully managed. The official story of health concerns was accepted by the media without much scrutiny, as such explanations were common for royals who wished to reduce their public duties. Thomas watched these changes unfold with mixed emotions. He had done his duty and helped prevent a serious crime, yet the resolution felt incomplete. The staff member who had provided Camilla with the key to the study was quietly dismissed without criminal charges. Another example of how palace matters were handled differently than ordinary crimes. The entire incident was being carefully managed to minimize damage while maintaining appearances. One afternoon, Thomas encountered Camilla in a palace corridor during one of her rare appearances within the residence. The meeting was unavoidable, and for a brief moment their eyes met. The look she gave him was difficult to interpret, containing elements of resentment, embarrassment, and perhaps even grudging respect. Neither spoke, but the silent exchange carried the weight of everything that had transpired between them. The Queen's health had indeed declined following the incident, though whether this was coincidence or the emotional toll of betrayal remained unclear. She moved more slowly through the palace halls, and her public appearances were reduced. Palace doctors assured staff that her condition was manageable, but everyone who worked closely with her could see that something fundamental had changed. The vitality that had sustained her through decades of service seemed diminished. Thomas found himself thinking often about the conversation he had with the Queen. Her question about justice versus discretion had revealed the impossible choices faced by those in positions of ultimate authority. There were no perfect solutions when every option carried significant costs. The Queen had chosen to protect the institution she had served her entire life, even at the expense of personal satisfaction or conventional justice. As months passed, new protocols became routine. The enhanced security measures for sensitive documents were accepted as necessary improvements rather than responses to a specific incident. Training programs were updated to include scenarios about detecting and preventing internal threats. Though the guards being trained would never know the real story that prompted these changes, the machinery of the palace moved forward. Adapting and continuing, Captain Morrison retired 6 months after the incident. His departure marked by a formal ceremony and genuine appreciation from the Queen. In a private moment before his departure, he told Thomas that the incident had weighed on him heavily and contributed to his decision to step away. He encouraged Thomas to remember that they had acted with integrity, even if the outcome felt unsatisfying. Sometimes doing the right thing meant living with imperfect results. Thomas received a commendation for his service, presented quietly without specific mention of the incident. The vague language in the citation spoke of dedication to duty and exemplary vigilance, words that could apply to any number of situations. He accepted the recognition with appropriate gratitude while feeling that the true significance of his actions would remain forever. Hidden from public knowledge, the impact on the royal family remained visible to those who knew what to look for. Relationships that had once seemed cordial became strained and formal. Family gatherings were less frequent and more carefully structured to minimize potential conflicts. The trust that held the family together had been damaged in ways that time alone could not repair completely. Thomas often wondered what would have happened if he had not been making his rounds at that exact moment. If he had turned down a different corridor or delayed his patrol by just a few minutes, Camilla might have completed her alterations and returned the documents without detection. The forged will might have been discovered only after the Queen's death. When challenging, it would have been exponentially more difficult and damaging. The thought reinforced his belief in the importance of vigilance and duty, even in routine moments. He had not been looking for heroism or recognition when he started his patrol that morning. He had simply been doing his job with the thoroughness and attention it deserved. The lesson stayed with him. Extraordinary moments often arise from ordinary dedication to responsibility. Life in the palace eventually settled into a new normal that incorporated the changes without dwelling on their origins. New guards joined the team and learned the enhanced protocols without knowing why they existed. The story of Camilla's attempted forgery became one of those palace secrets that a small group of people carried silently. Bound by duty and confidentiality agreements that would last their lifetimes, Thomas remained in service, continuing to walk the palace corridors with the same careful attention that had served him well. He never spoke publicly about what he had witnessed, honoring his commitment to discretion even as the weight of the secret remained with him. In quiet moments, he reflected on the complex nature of justice, loyalty, and duty that his experience had revealed. Years later, when Thomas would eventually retire from royal service, he would carry with him the knowledge that he had been present at a pivotal moment in palace history. He had witnessed betrayal at the highest levels and had responded with integrity and professionalism. The incident had taught him that doing the right thing was not always satisfying or clearly rewarded, but it remained essential regardless of the outcome. The Queen's will, when it was eventually read after her passing, reflected her original intentions without any of the alterations Camilla had attempted. Properties and inheritances were distributed as the Queen had truly wished, preserving her legacy according to her authentic desires. In this way, Thomas's vigilance that morning had protected not just documents, but the Queen's voice and will beyond her lifetime. The palace continued its eternal rhythm, hosting ceremonies and maintaining traditions that stretched back centuries. Within its walls, countless stories unfolded daily, as forgotten quickly while a few, like Thomas's, remained hidden but significant. The incident became part of the palace's secret history, known only to those who had lived through it. A reminder that even in the most elevated circles, human weakness and moral courage existed in equal measure.